Hillary Clinton entered the CNN studio believing she was there for a victory lap. She left understanding that some ghosts refuse to stay buried, and that Yale law graduates who served in Iraq know exactly how to build an airtight case. She arrived at the Time Warner Center with the bearing of someone who'd weathered impeachment hearings, a humiliating primary loss, and decades of conservative attacks while somehow remaining a fixture in Democratic power circles. She wore that calculated pantsuit, this one a shade of navy that probably required 3 consultants to select, and that mechanical smile that photographers had learned to capture at precisely the right angle to soften its edges. This was supposed to be safe harbor. CNN, a town hall on global democracy, polite conversation about threats to democratic institutions, a platform to position herself as elder stateswoman, a reminder that she'd held Senate seats and cabinet positions, that she had gravitas, that she mattered. What Hillary didn't anticipate was that J.D. Vance had been constructing this case since his nights at forward operating bases in Anbar Province, through every classified briefing as a senator, during every oversight hearing as vice president. He'd accumulated documentation. He'd secured declassification orders. He'd assembled FBI testimony through legal channels, congressional powers, and executive privilege. He'd constructed a prosecutorial framework that would make federal prosecutors envious. Vance sat opposite her, looking deceptively casual at 40, dressed in a charcoal suit and a tie featuring the Ohio state flag, a calculated sartorial choice that communicated working-class roots against Hillary's expensive coastal aesthetic. Before him rested an iPad and multiple manila folders, each stamped with red declassified markers visible to the studio cameras. He offered a greeting smile when Hillary arrived, that same Appalachian courtesy smile that had charmed Silicon Valley investors, disarmed Senate adversaries, and put foreign diplomats at ease. The smile that communicates friendliness right up until the moment it communicates your career is about to end in real time on national television. The moderator, Anderson Cooper, began with standard softballs about America's global standing and defending democracy worldwide. Hillary deployed her well-rehearsed talking points about her State Department tenure, her 100-plus countries visited, her Situation Room experience during critical moments. She casually mentioned world leaders she'd negotiated with, international crises she'd helped navigate, that infamous photograph of her on a military transport checking her BlackBerry that became an internet sensation. Then Vance shifted in his seat, reached for his iPad, and spoke in that measured Ohio accent that somehow amplified every word's impact. Secretary Clinton, regarding crisis management and Situation Room experience, let's examine the night of September 11, 2012. Benghazi. 4 Americans died while you were Secretary of State. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, Information Management Officer Sean Smith, former Navy SEALs Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. You told their families the attack stemmed from a YouTube video. Precisely when did you realize that explanation was false? The air in the studio crystallized. Anderson Cooper's expression registered visible shock. These weren't the pre-approved softball questions. Hillary's practiced smile locked in place like a computer screen frozen mid-process. And J.D. Vance simply waited with those declassified documents, that iPad loaded with recovered communications, patient for her response. What unfolded next became the reckoning Hillary Clinton had successfully avoided for over a decade. The woman who famously demanded, "What difference does it make?" was about to discover exactly what difference documented truth makes when someone refuses to let it stay buried. Hillary rallied with the practiced reflexes of someone who'd been deflecting scrutiny since her Whitewater real estate dealings in Arkansas. The Benghazi attack was exhaustively investigated by 8 separate congressional committees. Let's set aside the committees, Vance interrupted with surgical precision. Let's discuss that specific night, September 11, 2012. Let's examine the documented timeline minute by minute, shall we? He activated the first document on his tablet, angling it toward the camera array. The assault on the diplomatic facility in Benghazi commenced at 9:42 p.m. local Libyan time. You received notification within 30 minutes of the first shots fired. This is documented because the State Department Operations Center transmitted an email to your office at 10:32 p.m. That's 4:32 p.m. Washington time, stating approximately 20 armed individuals fired weapons. Explosions have been reported as well. Vance produced a printed email from his folder. But here's where the timeline becomes illuminating. At 11:12 p.m., merely 40 minutes after the initial attack began, you sent an electronic communication to your daughter Chelsea. You didn't address her by her actual name. You used the email alias Diane Reynolds because even in supposedly private family communications, you couldn't practice transparency. In that message, you wrote, and I'm quoting directly, "Two of our officers were killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group." He looked up from the document. An al-Qaeda-like group. Those were your words to your own daughter on the night it happened. Within 2 hours of the attack's commencement, you possessed knowledge it was terrorism. You understood it bore no connection to any YouTube video. You knew it involved al-Qaeda affiliation because that's precisely what you communicated to your own child in what you believed was a private email. Hillary opened her mouth to respond. Vance produced another document. The following morning at approximately 8 a.m. Washington time, you conducted a telephone call with Egyptian Prime Minister Hesham Kandil. According to the official State Department notes from that conversation, you explicitly told him, and again I'm quoting the official record, "We know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." Vance placed the document down carefully. "So let's clarify the facts here. You told your daughter the truth, terrorism, al-Qaeda affiliation. You told the Egyptian Prime Minister the truth, planned attack, no connection to any video. But what did you tell the American people? What did you tell the families of the dead Americans?" He activated a video compilation on the studio monitors. Hillary, at a press conference, standing beside flag-draped transfer cases containing the bodies of the 4 murdered Americans. "We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with." The footage continued. Hillary at a State Department press briefing. "We've seen the heavy assault on our post in Benghazi that took the lives of those brave men, linked to protests about a film mocking Islam." Another clip materialized. UN Ambassador Susan Rice appearing on 5 consecutive Sunday morning political shows, delivering identical talking points. This began as a spontaneous protest in response to what had transpired in Cairo, a protest responding to an internet video. Vance paused the video playback. Susan Rice appeared on 5 separate major television news programs and blamed a YouTube video. Who authorized her appearances? Who provided her those false talking points? He didn't pause for her answer. "You did, Secretary Clinton. You were her superior. Rice was UN ambassador," she reported through your chain of command. "Those coordinated talking points originated from your office, from your staff, with your knowledge and approval." He extracted testimony transcripts from another folder. But here's the most morally unconscionable element. Charles Woods, father of Tyrone Woods, one of the former SEALs who died defending that compound. He documented in his personal diary the exact words you spoke to him at the dignified transfer ceremony at Andrews Air Force Base. Direct quote, "We are going to have the filmmaker arrested who was responsible for the death of your son." The filmmaker, Secretary Clinton. You looked a grieving father directly in the eyes, while his son's body lay in a flag-draped coffin nearby, and you blamed a filmmaker for his son's murder when you possessed absolute knowledge it was a coordinated terrorist attack. Vance's voice acquired an edge of controlled anger. Patricia Smith, mother of Sean Smith. She provided sworn testimony before Congress describing your exact words to her at that same ceremony. Her quote, "Hillary told me it was the video. She told me they were going to arrest the man who made the video. She knew that was not true. She said it anyway, supposedly to make me feel better." He looked directly at Hillary. "To make her feel better. You lied to a mother who just lost her son, looked her in the face while she was drowning in grief, and you lied to make her feel better. Or was it to protect the Obama administration's campaign narrative 2 months before an election?" He arranged the documents in a precise row. "You told your daughter classified truth. You told foreign government leaders classified truth. You told your political allies classified truth. But you told the American public calculated lies. You told devastated families premeditated lies. Why would you do that? Because it was 56 days before the 2012 presidential election, and the entire Obama-Biden campaign was constructed around the narrative that al-Qaeda was decimated and on the run. You couldn't possibly acknowledge that al-Qaeda had successfully murdered 4 Americans on September 11th, on your watch as Secretary of State, while you'd been ignoring security requests for months. So you manufactured a lie, coordinated it across your department, sent Susan Rice to repeat it on national television, and looked grieving parents in their faces, and perpetuated that lie to protect Barack Obama's re-election prospects and your own political future. Hillary's face had transformed from confident to rigid defensiveness. The intelligence picture was evolving in real time. Those were fluid hours. Your own private communications prove you knew from hour one, Vance countered immediately. This wasn't evolving intelligence. This was coordinated deception. 4 Americans died. Ambassador Stevens had been sending urgent cables requesting enhanced security for months. His direct communications to your office meticulously documented the deteriorating security environment. He specifically asked for military security assets. You denied those requests. Every single one. Vance produced additional documentation. In the 6 months preceding the September 11th attack, Ambassador Stevens transmitted no fewer than 13 separate cables requesting additional security personnel, upgraded defensive positions, and enhanced military coordination. Your office, under your leadership, denied every request. Some requests never even received responses. On the night of the attack, when the diplomatic compound came under coordinated assault, American military assets were available within response range. CIA security contractors on the ground in Benghazi later provided testimony under oath that they were ordered to wait, to stand down rather than immediately respond to the attack in progress. Quick reaction forces were postured at military installations in Italy and across Europe. They were told to remain in place rather than deploy immediately. He met her eyes. 4 Americans died because you denied them adequate protection before the attack happened despite their repeated urgent requests, and then you failed to authorize immediate rescue operations during the attack while it was in progress. And then, Secretary Clinton, after they were dead, you lied about why they died, how they died, and who killed them, all to protect your political career and your party's electoral prospects. You asked Congress during your testimony, what difference at this point does it make? It makes all the difference between a public servant who takes responsibility and a politician who should have faced prosecution for criminal negligence, dereliction of duty, obstruction of justice, and perjury before Congress. The studio audience sat in absolute silence. Hillary remained rigidly postured, her carefully maintained composure fracturing in real time under documented evidence. Vance methodically gathered his first set of documents and reached deliberately for his second folder, this one noticeably thicker. But Benghazi is merely the opening chapter, he said with quiet intensity. Let's discuss your private email server and the systematic obstruction of justice that followed its discovery. And that, everyone watching from home, was only the first round. Vance had compiled 3 decades of Clinton corruption, scandal, and lies. Hit that subscribe button, because what comes next exposes the largest obstruction of justice in modern political history. Anderson Cooper attempted to cut to commercial break. Vance continued without acknowledging him. Secretary Clinton, you've characterized your private email server as a mistake, an error in judgment, perhaps poor optics. Let's examine what that supposed mistake actually entailed, because the documented evidence reveals not a mistake, but rather a premeditated criminal conspiracy to circumvent congressional oversight, violate the Federal Records Act, and evade Freedom of Information Act transparency requirements. He extracted technical forensic reports. March 2009, within weeks of your Senate confirmation as Secretary of State, you arranged installation of a private email server in the basement of your personal residence in Chappaqua, New York. This server, administered by a small Colorado IT firm called Platte River Networks, not by State Department information security personnel with proper clearances, processed 100% of your official government correspondence for your entire 4-year tenure. Vance displayed FBI investigative reports. The FBI's forensic investigation determined that you transmitted and received approximately 33,000 emails using this private unsecured server during your time as Secretary of State. Of those 33,000, 110 emails contained information that was classified at the time they were sent and received. 8 of those email chains contained top-secret information. That's the highest classification level in the U.S. government. An additional 2,000 emails were subsequently upgraded to classified status, meaning they contained sensitive information that endangered sources, methods, or national security interests. He placed the reports down carefully. Now every single government employee who handles classified material, from entry-level analysts to cabinet secretaries, receives mandatory training on proper handling, storage, and transmission of classified information. You personally signed multiple documents. I have them here, acknowledging that you understood classification protocols, handling requirements, and the criminal penalties for violations. Yet despite that signed acknowledgement, you deliberately conducted official State Department business, including discussions of classified intelligence operations, on a private server located in your house that possessed none of the security infrastructure, monitoring, or encryption required for government classified systems. Hillary began formulating a defense. The server was professionally secured and protected. The server was in your basement, Vance stated flatly. It wasn't monitored by U.S. government cybersecurity professionals. It wasn't protected by the same multi-layered firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and encryption protocols that protect State Department classified systems. FBI forensic analysis concluded, and I'm reading from their report, that the server was vulnerable to intrusion by hostile foreign intelligence services and likely was compromised. But Secretary Clinton, that's not even the criminal conduct I'm most concerned with. Let's discuss what happened after Congress discovered your scheme. He produced a detailed timeline. March 2, 2015, the New York Times publishes a front-page investigation revealing your use of a private email server for official business. That same month, March 4th specifically, the House Select Committee on Benghazi issues a formal congressional subpoena for all emails relating to Libya, Benghazi, and the September 11th attack. This is a congressional subpoena, Secretary Clinton. That's a legal order with the force of law requiring preservation and production of evidence. Interfering with a congressional subpoena is a federal crime. Vance held up the timeline document. What transpired next represents textbook obstruction of justice that would result in immediate prosecution for any normal American. 3 weeks after receiving that congressional subpoena, your personal attorney David Kendall and your chief of staff Cheryl Mills undertook to sort through all your emails. They unilaterally decided, without any independent oversight or review, that 31,830 emails were purely personal, about yoga schedules and Chelsea's wedding plans you claimed, and therefore didn't need to be preserved or produced to Congress. He extracted FBI witness testimony. Then your IT contractor, a man named Paul Cometa at Platte River Networks, used specialized software called BleachBit, a program specifically engineered to permanently delete digital data beyond any possibility of forensic recovery, to completely wipe those 31,830 emails from the server. BleachBit doesn't simply delete files the way normal deletion works. It systematically overwrites the data multiple times with random information so that even FBI forensic technology cannot recover it. That's not cleaning up your inbox, Secretary Clinton. That's destroying evidence under congressional subpoena, which is a federal felony. Vance produced another FBI document, but the evidence destruction didn't stop with BleachBit. The FBI investigation documented that you and your staff destroyed 13 mobile devices, smartphones and tablets, that had been used to access the classified email server. How were these devices destroyed? According to sworn FBI testimony, some were physically smashed with hammers. Others were simply reported as lost, conveniently unavailable for forensic examination. 13 devices that contained classified government communications, physically destroyed with hammers or mysteriously lost. He looked directly into the camera. Let me provide perspective for everyone watching at home. If a Marine corporal handled classified information on a private server in his apartment, he would face court-martial and military prison. If a government contractor destroyed evidence under congressional subpoena, they would be prosecuted and imprisoned. If any ordinary American used BleachBit to permanently delete subpoenaed emails and then smash their phones with hammers, they would be in federal prison right now serving a lengthy sentence. Vance turned back to Hillary. But you, Secretary Clinton, FBI Director James Comey appeared on national television and announced you had been extremely careless with classified information. Extremely careless, by the way, is not a legal standard that appears anywhere in federal statute. The relevant statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 793, requires gross negligence, and legal scholars across the political spectrum agree there is no meaningful distinction between extremely careless and gross negligence. Yet Director Comey then stated that no reasonable prosecutor would bring charges in this case. That's not a legal determination, Secretary Clinton. That's a political calculation. He extracted immunity agreements. And here's perhaps the most revealing element of the entire investigation. Your IT contractor Paul Cometa, the man who used BleachBit to destroy evidence, was granted immunity from prosecution. Your chief of staff Cheryl Mills, who sorted the emails and participated in the destruction, was granted immunity. Your aide Heather Samuelson, who also participated in sorting and deletion, was granted immunity. The FBI granted immunity to the very people who committed the crimes. Normally, prosecutors grant immunity to lower-level witnesses to secure their testimony against the main target. But in this unprecedented case, they granted immunity to the people who destroyed the evidence and then didn't prosecute anyone for anything. Hillary's voice carried tension. The FBI conducted an exhaustive, thorough investigation. The FBI conducted a politically compromised investigation, Vance corrected sharply. FBI field agents later provided testimony to Congress that they believed there was overwhelming evidence to support prosecution. They prepared recommendations for criminal charges, but they were overruled by FBI leadership and Department of Justice political appointees. You were running for President of the United States. The Obama administration had no intention of prosecuting their own party's presidential nominee regardless of the evidence, so they manufactured a reason to let you walk away. He spread all the documentation across the table. You established a private server specifically to avoid oversight and transparency. You conducted classified government business in secret, outside government systems. You exposed classified intelligence to potential compromise by foreign adversaries. When Congress issued a subpoena for your emails, you deleted 31,830 of them. You used software specifically designed to make them forensically unrecoverable. You destroyed 13 mobile devices with hammers. That's not a mistake, Secretary Clinton. That's not extremely careless. That's deliberate criminal intent. That's obstruction of justice. That's destruction of evidence under subpoena. Those are multiple federal felonies. Vance leaned forward, his voice hardening. If I had done what you did, I would be in federal prison. If any Marine I served with in Iraq had handled classified information the way you did, they would be dishonorably discharged and imprisoned. But you ran for President of the United States because your name is Clinton and Clintons operate under different rules. That's not equal justice under law. That's a two-tier justice system where political elites commit crimes with impunity while ordinary Americans face prosecution for far less. The audience sat in stunned silence. Hillary appeared as though she wanted to flee the stage, but Vance was already reaching for folder number 3, thicker than the previous 2. Now let's examine how you monetized your position as Secretary of State, he said evenly. Let's discuss the Clinton Foundation and the pay-to-play operation you ran out of the State Department. The studio remained absolutely silent. Hillary's famous political armor was disintegrating. 6 more documented rounds of evidence still to come. Vance extracted financial forensic reports with the methodical precision of a prosecutor presenting the key evidence in a corruption trial. The Clinton Foundation, ostensibly a charitable organization, purportedly helps impoverished people around the world. Except there's a remarkable pattern where everyone who donated substantial sums to this charity received special access to you as Secretary of State, received favorable policy decisions, or received government contracts. Statistically improbable coincidence, wouldn't you say? He displayed a financial flow chart. Let's begin with the most egregious example, Uranium-1. The Russian government, through state-owned Rosatom, sought to acquire majority control of Uranium-1, a Canadian mining company that controlled approximately 20% of America's uranium production capacity. This acquisition required approval from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, which included 9 government agencies, among them your State Department. Your approval was legally required. Vance produced the timeline. As this transaction was being reviewed by your State Department, Russian interests connected to the Uranium-1 acquisition donated $145 million to the Clinton Foundation. Let me repeat that number so everyone understands. $145 million from Russian sources flowed to your family foundation while you were deciding whether to approve their uranium acquisition. He displayed donation records. Specifically, the chairman of Uranium-1, a man named Ian Telfer, channeled $2.35 million to the Clinton Foundation through his personal family charity. Telfer's company was merging with Uranium-1. Frank Giustra, a Canadian mining magnate involved in the deals, donated $31.3 million to the foundation and pledged an additional $100 million. Multiple investors in the Uranium-1 deal donated millions more. Vance produced another document, but the Russian money didn't flow solely to the foundation. In June 2010, while the Uranium-1 deal was under active review by your State Department, your husband Bill Clinton was paid $500,000 for a single speech in Moscow. The entity that paid him, Renaissance Capital, a Russian investment bank with documented ties to the Kremlin. Renaissance Capital was actively promoting Uranium-1 stock to investors. He placed the documents down. So Bill Clinton received $500,000 from a Kremlin-connected Russian bank that was promoting the stock of the company you were simultaneously reviewing for approval. The State Department, under your leadership, approved the Uranium-1 transaction. Russia gained control of 20% of America's uranium production. The Clinton Foundation received $145 million. Bill received $500,000 for one speech. And you expect the American people to believe this was all pure coincidence. Hillary attempted to interrupt. The State Department was merely one of 9 agencies required to approve. You were Secretary of State, Vance stated. Your approval was mandatory. Your department signed off, and your family foundation simultaneously received $145 million from the entities directly benefiting from your approval. That's not public service, Secretary Clinton. That's auctioning American strategic assets to the highest bidder. He produced additional examples, but Uranium-1 wasn't an isolated incident. It was standard operating procedure. The Algerian government wanted favorable treatment from the State Department. They were under restrictions for human rights violations. Algeria donated $500,000 to the Clinton Foundation in 2010, during a period when Algerian government donations were explicitly prohibited under your ethics agreement. Shortly thereafter, State Department policy toward Algeria became markedly more favorable. Vance displayed more financial records. Swedish Telecommunications Corporation Ericsson was under significant State Department pressure to cease business operations with Iran. They had existing contracts worth billions with the Iranian regime in violation of sanctions. Then Ericsson paid Bill Clinton $750,000 for a single speech. Shortly after that payment, the State Department pressure mysteriously dissipated. Ericsson continued their Iran business for another year while simultaneously donating to the Clinton Foundation. He extracted a thick investigative file. Here's a comprehensive analysis of Clinton Foundation donors who received personal meetings with you as Secretary of State. Of the 154 private individuals who obtained personal meetings with you, 85 were foundation donors who had collectively given $156 million. That's 55% of your private meetings going to people who had paid money to your foundation. That's not access based on policy priorities or national interests, Secretary Clinton. That's pay-to-play corruption. Vance held up documents about Haiti. Then we have Haiti. In January 2010, a catastrophic earthquake devastated Haiti. The Clinton Foundation raised over $30 million specifically for Haiti relief. You were Secretary of State. Bill was appointed as UN Special Envoy to Haiti. The Clintons effectively controlled the international disaster response. And what happened to that $30 million raised for suffering Haitians? He displayed investigative journalism reports. Haitian community activists have been protesting for years demanding accountability for where the foundation money actually went. Investigative reporting documented that most of it went to contracts awarded to Clinton associates, donors, and personal friends. A luxury hotel resort development for wealthy tourists, not housing for displaced earthquake victims. The Haitian people, the ones supposedly being helped, saw almost none of the $30 million raised explicitly in their name. There were protests in Port-au-Prince with signs saying, "Where is the Clinton money?" People suffered while your foundation collected donations and distributed them to your cronies. Vance produced the final damning evidence. But here's the piece of evidence that proves the entire Clinton Foundation was a pay-to-play operation, not a genuine charity. After you lost the 2016 presidential election, Clinton Foundation donations collapsed by 90%. In 2016, when you had power and might potentially become president, the foundation raised $18 million. In 2017, after you lost and had no power, it raised only $10 million. By 2020, it was down to $16 million and continuing to decline. Why would charitable donations drop 90% if it's a legitimate charity doing genuine humanitarian work? He answered his own question. Because the donors were never giving to charity. They were purchasing access to power. When you had power, donations flooded in. When you lost power, donations evaporated. That's not philanthropy, Secretary Clinton. That's what federal prosecutors call a criminal racketeering enterprise. It's money laundering disguised as humanitarian charity. Vance gathered the financial documentation. You accepted $145 million from Russian interests while approving their uranium acquisition. You accepted money from foreign governments while simultaneously making policy decisions affecting those governments. You collected donations from individuals who then received State Department contracts, policy favors, and sanctions relief. After you lost the election and had no more power to sell, donations collapsed 90% because there was nothing left to purchase. The Clinton Foundation wasn't charity, Secretary Clinton. It was the mechanism through which you auctioned American foreign policy and government favors to the highest bidders worldwide. Hillary's face flushed red. The foundation has provided assistance to millions of people. The foundation helped you accumulate hundreds of millions of dollars while you sold government influence like a commodity, Vance said with controlled anger. When you had power, donations poured in. When you lost power, they stopped. That's not because you suddenly stopped helping people. That's because you had nothing left to sell. You monetized the State Department, auctioned policy decisions, and sold access through your foundation, and you called it public service and philanthropy. That's not charity. That's corruption on a scale that would make most dictators envious. 3 rounds complete. Hillary's experience was looking increasingly like systematic corruption. Keep watching, because the next round examines her catastrophic foreign policy legacy. Vance produced before and after satellite photographs of Libya. The before image showed organized urban areas and functioning infrastructure. The after image resembled a war zone demolition site. Secretary Clinton, you frequently cite your foreign policy experience as your primary qualification. Let's examine your signature foreign policy achievement in detail, the complete destruction and destabilization of Libya. You personally advocated for regime change. You got exactly what you wanted. What happened next to the Libyan people? He held up the before photograph. 2010, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. Was he a dictator? Absolutely. Was he brutal to political opponents? Yes. But Libya was stable. They possessed the highest standard of living in Africa. Free healthcare for all citizens, free education through university, functioning infrastructure and utilities, no terrorist presence. And critically, Gaddafi had voluntarily surrendered his nuclear weapons program in 2003 after observing what happened to Saddam Hussein. Vance set it down and displayed the after photograph. 2012 onward, Libya after your intervention, failed state, multiple competing governments, ongoing civil war. ISIS established a stronghold. Refugee crisis displacing hundreds of thousands. Weapons proliferating across the region. Open-air slave markets where human beings are bought and sold. This is your foreign policy legacy, Secretary Clinton. He extracted internal State Department emails. These are your personal emails from early 2011. They document that you were the primary advocate for military intervention in Libya within the Obama administration. President Obama was hesitant and uncertain. Defense Secretary Robert Gates explicitly opposed intervention, but you pushed relentlessly. You wanted this as your signature legacy achievement. You envisioned it as your opportunity to demonstrate that you could manage a successful regime change operation. Vance read from an email, quote, Libya represents a strategic opportunity to demonstrate that smart power works. That's you writing to your senior staff. Smart power. Let's examine how smart it actually was. He displayed the timeline. March 2011, NATO commences sustained bombing campaign against Libyan government forces. October 2011, Gaddafi is captured by rebel forces and brutally killed. And how did you, Secretary Clinton, react when you learned about his death? Vance played the video footage. Hillary on camera, visibly pleased, laughing. We came, we saw, he died. She laughs again, delighted with her paraphrase of Julius Caesar. Vance stopped the video. You laughed. A foreign head of state was sodomized with a bayonet and then shot to death in the street, and you found it amusing. You made a joke referencing ancient Rome. You were genuinely giddy about a brutal death. That's your response to political violence. He produced casualty and chaos reports. Here's what followed your laughter. Libya immediately collapsed into factional civil war. By 2012, Islamic extremist organizations had seized control of large portions of the country. By 2014, ISIS controlled significant territory including the major city of Sirte, establishing training camps and operational bases. By 2015, Libya had become the primary launching point for desperate refugees attempting to reach Europe, hundreds of thousands fleeing the chaos and violence you created. Vance held up weapons trafficking intelligence reports. Weapons from Gaddafi's massive military stockpiles, including thousands of surface-to-air missiles capable of shooting down civilian aircraft, disappeared into the black market. They proliferated across North Africa and the Middle East. They appeared in Syria, fueling that civil war. They appeared with Boko Haram in Nigeria. They appeared with al-Qaeda affiliates across the region. Your intervention didn't just destroy Libya, it destabilized an entire region and armed terrorist organizations for years to come. He displayed humanitarian reports. By 2017, the United Nations and human rights organizations were documenting open-air slave markets operating in Libya. Black African migrants were being openly bought and sold as property in a country you claimed to liberate for humanitarian reasons. Slave markets, Secretary Clinton. That's your humanitarian intervention legacy in Libya. Vance produced the final connection. And then you sent Ambassador Christopher Stevens into this chaos you created. You deployed him to Benghazi, one of the most dangerous cities in the failed state you helped create, with completely inadequate security despite his repeated requests. He asked for help. You denied it. And on September 11, 2012, he was murdered in the attack we discussed earlier, the attack you lied about to the American people and to grieving families. He looked directly at her. You personally pushed for regime change in Libya over objections from Defense Department leadership. You got your regime change. Gaddafi was killed. You laughed about his death on camera. Then Libya became a failed state. ISIS established strongholds. Weapons flooded across the region arming terrorists. Slave markets opened where humans are sold as property. Hundreds of thousands became refugees. And your ambassador who you sent into that chaos with inadequate protection was killed. That's your foreign policy legacy, Secretary Clinton. Death, chaos, failed states, weapons proliferation, terrorism, refugees, slave markets, and laughing about it on camera for the world to see. Hillary attempted a defense. Libya was facing a humanitarian catastrophe under Gaddafi. Libya is a humanitarian catastrophe now. After your intervention, Vance countered sharply. It was stable under Gaddafi, oppressive but stable and functioning. You transformed it into an anarchic hellscape with literal slave markets. The humanitarian situation is objectively, measurably worse now than before your intervention. You destroyed a functioning country and then simply walked away from the rubble without any plan for stabilization or reconstruction. He gathered the Libya documentation. You had no coherent plan for post-Gaddafi Libya. You simply wanted regime change as a trophy achievement. You wanted to prove you could do what George W. Bush did in Iraq, and you created a disaster that resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, destabilized an entire region, fueled the rise of ISIS, and sent millions of desperate refugees fleeing into Europe. That's not leadership, Secretary Clinton. That's catastrophic negligence disguised as humanitarian intervention. Vance leaned forward, and the worst element is you learned absolutely nothing. You subsequently wanted to do exactly the same thing in Syria, push for regime change against Assad with no plan for aftermath. Thank God President Obama finally stopped listening to your advice and prevented you from creating a second Libya, because your version of foreign policy is destroying countries and then claiming you liberated them while they burn and descend into chaos. 4 rounds complete. Hillary visibly shaken. But Vance had more foreign policy failures to document. Vance produced a prop, an actual red button like a novelty toy. Remember this, Secretary Clinton. March 2009, Geneva, Switzerland. You presented Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov with a red button labeled Reset to symbolize improved U.S.-Russia relations. The Russian translation was misspelled, but that's not even the most embarrassing part. Let's discuss what you actually reset with Russia and what that reset accomplished. He set down the button and extracted policy analysis documents. During your tenure as Secretary of State, Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, weak American response under your watch. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 after you'd left office, but based entirely on the weakness and lack of deterrence you'd established. Russia intervened militarily in Syria to prop up the Assad regime. You enabled that by failing to establish any credible American deterrence. Under your leadership, Russia became systematically more aggressive internationally, not less. Your reset was a complete failure. Vance produced financial records again. But while you were demonstrating weakness toward Russia diplomatically, the Clinton Foundation was being remarkably friendly with Russia financially. Uranium One transaction, $145 million from Russian interests to your foundation. Bill's Moscow speech, $500,000 from a Kremlin-connected bank. We've covered those transactions, extracted new documents, but there's additional Russian cooperation. Skolkovo, have you heard of it? Russia's attempt to build their version of Silicon Valley, a high-tech research park outside Moscow. Sounds innocent, perhaps beneficial. Except the FBI and U.S. Army intelligence raised explicit concerns that Skolkovo was a technology transfer operation, Russia using civilian research partnerships to benefit their military capabilities. Vance held up State Department communications. Despite these intelligence warnings, you actively helped Russia build Skolkovo. You directed American technology companies to participate, companies that were, coincidentally, Clinton Foundation donors. The U.S. Army Foreign Military Studies program at Fort Leavenworth assessed that Skolkovo would directly assist Russia in developing hypersonic missiles and other advanced military technology, but you pushed American participation anyway. He set those documents down. So let's review your Russia record. As Secretary of State, you helped Russia acquire American uranium. You helped Russia build a military technology research facility despite intelligence warnings. You demonstrated weakness in response to Russian aggression. You accepted Russian money through your foundation. And then, Vance extracted the 2016 election documents. Then you lost the presidential election to Donald Trump. And suddenly, overnight, Russia transformed from reset partner to existential threat. For 4 years, you blamed your loss on Russia. You claimed Trump colluded with Russia. You funded the Steele dossier, which was literally Russian disinformation about Trump that you paid for, and then weaponized to launch investigations that paralyzed his presidency. He held up the Mueller report. Special counsel Robert Mueller spent 2 years and $32 million taxpayer dollars investigating Trump-Russia collusion. He interviewed 500 witnesses, issued 2,800 subpoenas, executed nearly 500 search warrants, and obtained almost 500 witnesses giving testimony. His conclusion, documented in this report: no collusion, no coordination, no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. You lied for 4 years about collusion that never existed, that Mueller conclusively determined never happened. Vance produced the Steele dossier, but there was Russia collusion. Yours. You paid Fusion GPS to pay Christopher Steele to pay Russian intelligence sources to fabricate opposition research about Trump. That dossier was filled with unverified, salacious claims from Russian intelligence sources. It was Russian disinformation, and you used it to try to destroy Trump's presidency. He laid out the evidence. The FBI knew the dossier was unreliable garbage. The primary subsource for Steele's dossier told the FBI it was speculation and bar talk, not verified intelligence. But the FBI used it anyway to obtain FISA warrants to conduct surveillance on Trump campaign associates. And this entire operation started with your campaign paying for Russian-sourced dirt on your political opponent. Vance looked into the camera. Let me clarify this for everyone. Hillary took Russian money through her foundation. Hillary helped Russia acquire uranium and technology. Hillary was weak on Russian aggression. Then when she lost the election, she blamed Russia. She claimed Trump colluded with Russia, which was a lie. Meanwhile, she literally paid for Russian disinformation about Trump and weaponized it to launch investigations that hobbled his presidency for 2 years. She accused Trump of precisely what she herself did. That's not irony. That's psychological projection. He turned back to Hillary. You colluded with Russia through the Steele dossier, paid Russian sources for dirt. You took Russian money through your foundation. You helped Russian strategic interests as Secretary of State. Then you accused your opponent of your own crimes. You gaslit an entire nation for 4 years about collusion that was conclusively proven not to exist, while simultaneously engaging in actual Russia collusion yourself through paid Russian sources. Hillary's voice rose defensively. The intelligence community assessed that Russia interfered in the election. Russia interfered, Vance agreed. They always attempt to interfere. They interfere in many countries' elections. But there was no Trump collusion. Mueller confirmed that conclusively. There was, however, documented Clinton-Russia corruption. The money trail proves it. You accepted their money, approved their deals, facilitated their technology transfers. And when you were caught, you accused your opponent of your own crimes. That's not just corruption, Secretary Clinton. It's one of the most successful gaslighting operations in American political history. 5 rounds complete. Hillary's Russia hysteria exposed as projection of her own behavior. 3 more devastating rounds coming. Vance extracted a laptop, unusual for his typically paper-based presentation, but necessary for what followed. Secretary Clinton, you speak frequently about defending democracy, protecting democratic norms, safeguarding election integrity. Let's discuss how you actually treated democracy within your own party's primary election. He opened the laptop to display emails projected on studio screens. July 2016, WikiLeaks publishes approximately 20,000 internal Democratic National Committee emails. These emails revealed something extraordinary. The DNC, which is required by its own charter to remain neutral during primaries, was actively working to help you and undermine Bernie Sanders. Vance displayed specific emails on screen. May 21, 2016, DNC Communications Director Louis Miranda writes, wondering if there's a good Bernie narrative for a story, which is that Bernie never ever had his act together, that his campaign was a mess. That's the supposedly neutral DNC brainstorming negative media narratives about your opponent. Another email, May 5, 2016, DNC CFO Brad Marshall writes, it might make no difference, but for KY and WVA can we get someone to ask his belief? Does he believe in a God? He had skated on saying he has a Jewish heritage. I think I read he is an atheist. This could make several points difference with my peeps. My Southern Baptist peeps would draw a big difference between a Jew and an atheist. They wanted to use religious attacks against Bernie Sanders in southern states, potentially exploiting anti-Semitic prejudice and anti-atheist bias to damage your opponent. Vance looked up from the screen. The DNC was planning to weaponize religious bigotry against Bernie Sanders to assist you. Let that settle in. The party that claims to champion tolerance and oppose discrimination was strategizing to exploit religious prejudice to help their preferred candidate. He displayed additional emails. April 24, 2016, DNC official Mark Postenbach suggests to Miranda, wondering if there's a good Bernie narrative for a story, which is that Bernie never ever had his act together, that his campaign was a mess. These are party officials who are required by DNC charter to remain impartial, actively coordinating negative press coverage about your primary opponent. Vance displayed debate documentation. Then there's Donna Brazzo. She was a CNN contributor and simultaneously vice chair of the DNC. In October 2016, WikiLeaks revealed she sent you debate questions in advance. Before a CNN town hall event, she transmitted to your campaign an email containing the exact wording of a question about the death penalty. Before another debate, she sent advance notice of a question about Flint's water crisis. You received the questions early, Secretary Clinton. Bernie Sanders did not. He pulled out more evidence. When this was exposed publicly, CNN terminated Brazzo's contract. She initially denied it, called it false, claimed it was Russian disinformation. Then in 2017, after you lost, she published a book. In that book, she admitted everything and more. She wrote, quote, I had promised Bernie when I took the helm of the Democratic National Committee after the convention that I would get to the bottom of whether Hillary Clinton's team had rigged the nomination process. By September 7th, I had found my proof, and it broke my heart. Vance read from the book. The agreement, signed by Amy Dacey, the former CEO of the DNC, and Robbie Mook, Clinton's campaign manager, specified that in exchange for raising money and investing in the DNC, Hillary would control the party's finances, strategy, and all the money raised. Her campaign had the right of refusal of who would be the party communications director, and it would make final decisions on all the other staff. The DNC also was required to consult with the campaign about all other staffing, budgeting, data, analytics, and mailings. This agreement was signed in August 2015, before a single primary vote was cast. He looked at Hillary directly. You purchased control of the Democratic National Committee a full year before the primary election began. You controlled the party infrastructure, the finances, the personnel, while running against Bernie Sanders. That's not a Democratic primary election, Secretary Clinton. That's a coronation disguised as democracy. Vance produced the final documentation. When DNC Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz was forced to resign in disgrace over the scandal of DNC bias, you hired her immediately, that same day. She resigned under pressure for rigging the primary in your favor, and you gave her a position in your campaign within hours. That's not distancing yourself from corruption. That's rewarding it. That's telling everyone involved in rigging the process that they'll be taken care of. He gathered the evidence methodically. You received debate questions in advance while your opponent didn't. The DNC worked actively to undermine your opponent while being required to remain neutral. You had financial control over the party apparatus during the primary. When the DNC chair resigned over bias toward you, you hired her immediately. Bernie Sanders never had a fair opportunity because you purchased the referees before the game started. Hillary protested. I won by millions of votes, the voters chose me. After rigging every element of the process, Vance responded. After receiving questions early, after the DNC put their institutional thumb on the scale, after controlling party finances and personnel, after coordinating negative media narratives, you didn't win a fair Democratic primary election, Secretary Clinton. You won a rigged process, and then you have the audacity to lecture about defending democratic norms. You subverted democracy within your own party and then expected Americans to trust you to defend it nationally. He leaned back. Here's the ultimate irony. Bernie Sanders supporters were furious when this was exposed. Many stayed home in the general election. Some voted third party. Some even voted for Trump out of anger at the corruption. You suppressed and alienated your own party's voter turnout by rigging the primary. You damaged your own general election campaign by being too corrupt and greedy to allow democracy to function even within your own party. That's not political strategy, Secretary Clinton. That's self-destructive corruption, born from an inability to compete fairly even when you probably would have won anyway. 6 rounds complete. Hillary's Democratic credentials destroyed by her own documented actions. 2 more rounds, these intensely personal. Vance paused, gathering himself. This round required careful handling but needed to be addressed. Secretary Clinton, you've positioned yourself as a champion of women's rights, a feminist icon, an advocate for women who have experienced victimization. Let's examine your actual record on that front, specifically your documented treatment of women who accused your husband of sexual misconduct and assault. Hillary's expression went rigid. This was territory she'd successfully kept off-limits for decades through media allies and political protection. But Vance had documentation, and he was finished respecting those boundaries. Bill Clinton's history with women is extensively documented. Multiple women accused him of sexual misconduct spanning decades. Jennifer Flowers, Paula Jones, Kathleen Willey, Juanita Broaddrick, and most famously Monica Lewinsky, a 22-year-old White House intern with whom the President of the United States conducted an inappropriate relationship involving extraordinary power imbalance. Vance produced court documentation. Let's begin with Paula Jones. She filed a federal lawsuit against your husband in 1994 for sexual harassment, claiming he propositioned her crudely in a hotel room when he was Arkansas governor, and she was a low-level state employee. Your response: you personally led the campaign to destroy her credibility. You reportedly referred to her as trailer trash to staff and journalists. Your political advisor James Carville famously stated about Paula Jones, quote, "Drag $100 bill through a trailer park, you never know what you'll find." That was your team's deliberate strategy. Smear the accuser, destroy her credibility, make her regret coming forward. He produced additional documentation. Juanita Broaddrick. She claimed your husband raped her in a hotel room in 1978 when he was Arkansas Attorney General. She remained silent for 2 decades out of fear and trauma. When she finally told her story publicly in 1999 in a televised interview, what was your response? According to her sworn testimony, you approached her at a campaign event shortly after the alleged assault and said, quote, "I want you to know that we appreciate everything you do for Bill." She interpreted it, and multiple witnesses corroborated her interpretation, as a threat, a message to keep silent about what happened. Vance looked directly at Hillary. A woman claims she was raped by your husband, and you allegedly intimidated her into silence to protect your political partnership. Is that championing women's rights, Secretary Clinton? He produced the Lewinsky documentation. Then there's Monica Lewinsky. Yes, she was legally an adult, but she was 22 years old, an unpaid intern. The president was 49, the most powerful man in the world. That's not a relationship between equals, that's a massive power imbalance that made genuine consent questionable. And when the scandal became public, how did you respond? Did you believe the young woman? Did you acknowledge the power dynamics? No. You appeared on the Today Show and talked about a vast right-wing conspiracy trying to destroy your husband. You blamed political opponents. You blamed conservative media. You blamed everyone except the man who abused his position of power to conduct an affair with an intern young enough to be his daughter. Vance displayed video clips. Hillary on national television defending Bill, attacking his accusers, claiming it was political persecution. You called it a conspiracy. You attacked the women. You used your platform and considerable power to discredit anyone who threatened your political partnership with Bill, your path to power through his career. He set down the remote control. Here's what's truly remarkable about your hypocrisy. During the Me Too movement, you positioned yourself as an ally. You stated we should believe women. You championed survivors of sexual assault and harassment. You gave speeches about supporting women who come forward. But which women? Secretary Clinton. All women except the ones who accused your husband. That's not feminism. That's selective application of principles based on political convenience. Vance produced recent public statements. You've stated, and I'm quoting you directly, every survivor of sexual assault deserves to be heard, believed, and supported. That's your quote from 2017. But you didn't believe Paula Jones, you called her trash. You didn't believe Juanita Broderick, you allegedly intimidated her. You didn't believe Kathleen Willey. You didn't support Monica Lewinsky, you blamed her and called it a conspiracy. You actively worked to destroy these women's credibility to protect your political interests. He leaned forward intensely. And here's the uncomfortable truth that everyone knows but few discuss publicly. You stayed with Bill Clinton through all of this, through all the accusations, through the proven affairs, through the impeachment. Not because of love, nobody believes that. You stayed because you needed his political network and name recognition to build your own career. He gave you the platform. Governor's wife, then First Lady, then Senator from New York based largely on sympathy after the Lewinsky scandal, then Secretary of State, then presidential candidate. You rode his political coattails despite his treatment of women because your ambition outweighed your principles. Vance gathered the documentation. You attacked women who accused your husband to protect your political partnership. You stayed with him despite his behavior to maintain your path to power. Then you positioned yourself as a feminist champion while having destroyed women who came forward. That's not supporting women, Secretary Clinton. That's weaponizing feminism for political benefit while practicing the opposite in your personal life. You're not a champion of women's rights. You're someone who destroyed women to protect your own political ambition and then marketed yourself as their advocate. That's not hypocrisy, that's something far worse. 7 rounds complete. Hillary looked devastated, her carefully constructed public image in ruins. One final round remained. Vance gathered his final folder, the thinnest but perhaps most personally devastating. Secretary Clinton, we've covered your lies about Benghazi, your criminal obstruction with the email server, your pay-to-play corruption through the foundation, your catastrophic Libya policy, your Russia collusion and projection, your rigging of the Democratic primary, and your attacks on women who accused your husband. Let's conclude with the simplest question. Why are you still here? What gives you the belief that you have any credibility, any authority, any right to lecture anyone about anything? You didn't wait for response. You've been involved in scandals for 4 decades. Whitewater in Arkansas, Travelgate, Filegate, the Rose law firm billing records that mysteriously disappeared and reappeared. Cattle futures trading where you somehow made $100,000 from a $1,000 investment through trades that multiple analysts concluded were impossible without illegal assistance. Pardons your husband granted on his last day in office to major Democratic donors. Every decade of your public life has been marked by corruption, scandal, and escaping accountability. Hillary attempted to respond. Vance continued. You ran for president in 2008 as the inevitable candidate. You lost the primary to a first-term senator nobody had heard of 4 years earlier. You ran again in 2016 as the inevitable candidate with every advantage. The entire Democratic establishment behind you, vastly more money than your opponent, media overwhelmingly in your favor. And you lost to Donald Trump, a reality TV host with no political experience who was outspent 2-1. He looked at her directly. You lost to Donald Trump, Secretary Clinton. You had every advantage and you lost to a candidate the entire establishment said was unelectable. You know why? Because even faced with Donald Trump, Americans looked at you and decided you were less trustworthy, less honest, less acceptable. That's your legacy. He gathered all his folders. 4 Americans died in Benghazi and you lied about it. You committed multiple felonies with classified information and faced no consequences. You sold government access through your foundation. You destroyed Libya and laughed about it. You colluded with Russia and blamed your opponent. You rigged your own primary. You attacked women to protect your political marriage. And after all of that, you lost to Donald Trump and you've spent years blaming everyone except yourself. Vance stood. So here's my final question, Secretary Clinton. When will you accept responsibility? When will you acknowledge that your decades of corruption, lies, and scandal are why Americans don't trust you? When will you stop blaming vast conspiracies, Russian interference, sexism, and James Kamai, and look in the mirror and admit that you lost because of your own choices, your own corruption, your own dishonesty? When will you finally just go away and let the Democratic Party move forward without the Clinton baggage that's poisoned it for 3 decades? Hillary sat in stunned silence, unable to formulate response. Vance closed his final folder. "That's all I have, Anderson. I think we've covered everything." The studio remained silent for a long moment. Anderson Cooper seemed unable to formulate a question. The audience sat motionless. Hillary Clinton, for perhaps the first time in her political career, had no talking points, no deflection, no practiced response. She'd been systematically dismantled with her own documented record. 8 rounds. Decades of scandal exposed. The reckoning Hillary Clinton spent 30 years avoiding, delivered in one devastating confrontation. If you want to see more political reckonings where documented evidence destroys carefully constructed narratives, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this is what accountability looks like when someone finally refuses to let the powerful escape their own record.